Good afternoon and welcome to a fireside chat on the economic benefits of climate action. I'm Mayor LEIRION GAYLOR BAIRD, and joining me today are key leaders in our state who are unleashing innovation to create new markets, grow their businesses, and build climate-smart solutions right here in Nebraska. This event represents a collaboration of two major administration initiatives, Resilient Lincoln and Lincoln Forward. And our purpose today is to build awareness of the economic advantages of investing in a sustainable, low-carbon economy for a more resilient future. One of my top priorities after taking office in 2019 was to develop a climate action plan so that here in Lincoln we would be well informed of the challenges we face with the climate change and be prepared to mitigate them and adapt. And in addition to developing strategies to increase resilience, it was also really important to explore the many opportunities that drive economic growth, create high-paying jobs, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and reduce the cost of inaction for Lincoln residents and businesses. As sustainable technologies become more efficient and affordable, and as clean energy investments rise, there is a tremendous opportunity to spur economic development and job growth while combating climate change. In fact, more than 80% of the world's largest companies have already established emission reduction or energy-specific targets. Smart companies understand the risks posed by climate change to their bottom line and are demonstrating bold leadership in setting ambitious and meaningful greenhouse gas reduction goals for their companies. For example, Microsoft pledged to reduce emissions from its operations by 75% by the year 2030, and has operated as 100% carbon neutral since 2012. Auto manufacturers like General Motors and Toyota are producing more electric vehicles, committing to renewable energy, increasing recycled materials into their products, and eliminating carbon emissions from their operations and supply chains. As an example of job growth, the energy sector is one of the fastest growing markets in the country. Energy efficiency companies added 76,000 new jobs in 2018, accounting for over half of all new clean energy jobs. And in that same year, nationwide, clean energy jobs grew 3.6% to 3.3 million individuals employed in fields ranging from wind to solar to energy efficiency to electric vehicles to battery storage. In fact, in 2018, clean energy jobs outnumbered those in the fossil fuel industry by 3-1. As fortune would have it, the state of Nebraska has the third highest potential for wind energy production in the entire United States and the 10th highest potential for solar. A strong business case can be made for the emplacement of renewable energy sources in Nebraska, one that leads to a future where we can boast an economic portfolio that includes both agriculture and the production of clean energy. Wind and solar are free, unlimited renewable resources. They offer a clean source of fuel that creates neither air nor water pollution. This infrastructure can coexist with agricultural production to bring additional revenue to local farms and ranches. In short, renewables are a cost-effective job creator that enable energy growth and competitiveness on a global scale, while increasing domestic energy security and reliability. Renewables are also the most cost-competitive energy sources today, proving to be much less expensive to produce, even without government subsidies, compared to fossil fuel sources, especially coal. In fact, about 75% of the U.S. coal fleet is now more expensive to operate than it would be to build and operate new solar and wind energy. And this explains why clean energy investments rose 20% from 2018 to 2019, reaching $78.3 billion in the U.S., second only to China in total clean energy investments. Another economic benefit of climate action? Jobs. Good jobs. High-paying jobs. In 2019, the renewable energy sector accounted for more than twice as many jobs than the fossil fuel energy sector. There were 3.6 million clean energy jobs in 2019, many of which don't require college degrees. And the mean hourly wage for these jobs is 8 to 19% higher than the national average. Taking climate action with renewable infrastructure investments also grows the tax base. In 2018, wind farms paid $761 million in state and local taxes, an additional source of funding for local infrastructure projects to improve schools, roads, bridges, and hospitals. $289 million went toward lease payments to farmers and landowners who hosted renewable energy production on their land, further stabilizing their incomes. The majority of U.S. states are reducing greenhouse gas emissions while also growing their GDP, including Kansas, Iowa, Missouri, Colorado, Oklahoma, and Illinois. And just like our Midwestern neighbors, Nebraska has the potential to be a critical player in power production across the U.S., growing jobs and our economy, while also increasing our resilience to climate change. Here to chat with me more about growing renewable energy in our state is the Honorable Josh Moenning, Mayor of Norfolk, and the founder of New Power Nebraska, a coalition focused on renewable sources of energy generation to help power Nebraska's economy, grow jobs, generate new income streams for farmers, while growing significant new tax revenue for schools and local governments. Mayor Moenning has a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and completed graduate coursework in agricultural economics and rural community development at Iowa State University. Welcome, Mayor Moenning. We're so pleased to see you and have you join us here today. How are things going in Norfolk?
Well, I'm really glad to join you. Thank you, Mayor. They're going well, all things considered. It's been a tough year, as you know, for all kinds of governments to manage through this, but I think we're seeing light at the end of the tunnel, and people are feeling more hopeful about getting out and being engaged in the community while keeping safe. So I think we've all had to try to strike the right balance, and for the most part, I think we've been able to do that.
Agreed. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I know that Norfolk is lucky to have your leadership during these times. So, and especially when it comes to climate issues. And I guess as we think about impacts from the accelerated rate of climate change that we're experiencing, I wonder what are some of the new approaches that you're taking to spur economic development and job growth as you address it?
Sure. Yeah. So it's really hitting close to home, isn't it, with more frequent extreme weather events and us having to deal with new climate realities. But we have tried to address that by doing two things: being part of the climate solution and creating new market opportunities that come from that. And so we have reoriented a lot of our economic growth strategies toward three areas of where we feel we have some comparative advantage regionally and areas of emerging demand in the marketplace. And one of those is precision agriculture that's rooted in sustainability. Another area is water quality and conservation. And then the third area is clean energy generation. And our part of the state has really benefited from a lot of the wind development that has been seen in Nebraska in the last few years. And so part of my job, I wear a couple different hats. Obviously, the city of Norfolk is engaging directly in local renewable generation. Professionally, I also work in the field of clean energy and have been able to see through that work how rural economies, how our state economy really has benefited from clean energy development.
That's great. You alluded to extreme events recently, and I know we all across Nebraska experienced the extreme cold recently and rolling outages. How have those just very recent examples of the impacts of extreme weather events, how do they inform your plans as you think about these investments in renewable energy? How does that change the conversation you're having in your community?
Sure, absolutely. So I think it was important after the fact to really explore what happened. And you had some unusual circumstances in terms of such an extreme cold event for an extended period of time, obviously put stress on our electricity grid. And a lot of people who had never heard of the Southwest Power Pool suddenly know more about SPP than they probably ever cared to. But I think it's important to note that, some people intentionally tried to lay blame for some of the outages on renewable energy. But when you peel back the layers on this and look at what really happened, you'll find that wind energy, for example, in the Midwest within SPP, outperformed expectations, whereas you had other energy sources that really had a hard time keeping up, like natural gas and coal, and so that created a larger problem. But I think it's important in future planning to think about diversification and distributed generation and battery storage. As I know, LES is engaged in those discussions, and we're engaged in those discussions with our energy provider, NPPD. And in fact, Norfolk will start construction on our community solar project within the next month and a half. And so that's something we've been working at for a while, and we're excited to get that off the ground. That'll be a 8.5 megawatt solar array that is tied to a battery energy storage system, which will be the first of its size in the state. So we're really excited to get that going.
That is exciting. I look forward to hearing more about that as it comes online. Yeah, and I appreciate you digging into the truth of the matter when it comes to these extreme events. It's really important that we understand the reality on the ground so we can plan, like you said, plan to be resilient in the future. Our climate action plan here in Lincoln is about just planning smart, being smart, strengthening infrastructure so that we're prepared for whatever comes. And I know we had extreme events not too long ago, back in 2019, when we had flooding on the Platte River. I'm wondering how Norfolk experienced and those historic events and how you fared through that, and how that has also shaped your thinking when it comes to this kind of planning effort.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first I want to say I really admire your leadership and proactivity in creating that plan and looking into the future and being prepared to be resilient, because we will undoubtedly see more and more of these extreme weather events, and communities need to be fully prepared to withstand them. And so, that gets back to, what Norfolk experienced in the 2019 flooding of the North Fork, the Elkhorn River, and that whole river system from the northwest to the southeast in our state that both of our communities experienced. We had, luckily, city leaders in the 1960s who had seen dozens of floods take over downtown Norfolk, decide that we needed to do something once and for all to better prepare for the future. And so they worked with the state of Nebraska and the Army Corps of Engineers to put in place a flood control system that was considered overbuilt at the time. In fact, the Army Corps engineers said, look, you guys are doing more than you need to here. This is probably bigger than it needs to be. But the local official said, no, trust us. We've seen it. It needs to be scaled to this size. And we're lucky that it was built that way, because in the 19 floods, the levee did its job. It held. It came within a foot of overtopping in some places. Our flood control channel held more water than the Missouri River at that time, but we didn't suffer any major property damage, because that flood control system did what it was supposed to do. And so that investment that was made back in the 60s, and I'm sure a lot of people questioned, why are we spending all this money? It has paid dividends. It has saved the community, not in just that occasion, but other occasions over the last few decades. And so really points to the prudence of being proactive about infrastructure planning, especially in this day and age.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of segues into my next question, was about really cities and their role in taking climate action. I know as a mayor, sometimes I get questions about, well, this is a global issue. Why would you think about it at the city level? Do you have more thoughts to share on that and why it matters?
Yeah, I think cities can play a very large role in prompting change about how we think about this challenge, because there's certainly the opportunity for cities our governments are on the front lines. We're a little leaner and meaner and a little more nimble than state governments, and certainly the federal government to directly participate in solutions. And so that's why, you know, in Norfolk's instance, we're interested in community solar, not only to be part of that solution, but also because it makes good economic sense now. You know, the power we'll be purchasing from solar will be cheaper to the extent of 15 to 25% cheaper than the conventional generation mix that we currently buy from, which is primarily coal and nuclear. So we're starting to see that this is not only the right thing to do in order to be resilient and again be part of the climate solution, but there's a business case for it, and it makes good economic sense. And oh, by the way, that generation, Nebraska being an energy producer, means economic benefits that we've never really experienced before. Obviously, we're not an oil and gas state, but we are a wind and solar state. Surprisingly high levels of energy potential in both, third highest in the nation in wind, and in the top 10 in solar. And so what that means for the communities who choose to be part of it, I think, is a lot of benefit for its citizens and for regional economies.
I agree. I think it's a real opportunity to put Nebraska on the map in yet another way. With that, I guess I'd just be curious, what's next for Norfolk, Mayor? What are you excited about as we head into a new year, 2021?
Sure. I'm really encouraged, even through the last year and all the challenges that we've had. People have shown confidence in investing in new things. Our sales tax receipts, which is really the best economic indicator we have, were really strong. You know, when the pandemic hit in March, we fully anticipated having to dip into our emergency reserves. But in the end, our sales tax receipts were up 7% over the year before. And so we didn't have to do that. We're very reliant on sales tax revenue for city operations. So we feel pretty fortunate that projects that were planned or were ongoing, even during the pandemic, it stayed online and kept moving forward. And now we're seeing even more. We're seeing a lot of potential growth on the horizon in terms of new housing, new commercial building, and new small business development, which is really an engine for our city. You know, we're lucky to have a strong industrial base, which has been very important to us for a long time, but we're really kind of focusing economic growth strategies going forward on small business entrepreneurship in those three areas that I mentioned before, because we think we have comparative advantage in each of those sectors.
Well, if there's anything the pandemic has taught us, it's how we're all interconnected. And while we wear our city hats, respective cities, what helps Norfolk helps Lincoln, what helps Lincoln helps Norfolk, because we're all working to make a stronger Nebraska and grow and build prosperity in our state for our people and our businesses. So it's just really exciting to hear about all the great things that you're doing for the city of Norfolk and our state. And I really thank you for joining me today, Mayor Moenning, and I hope that we will see you again soon.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate your leadership and providing a good example for other communities throughout the state, and always enjoy the chance to work together.
Right back at you. Thank you. You take care.
Great. Thanks, Mayor. Take care.
Well, next up we have Rob HANSON, the co-founder and CEO of Monolith Materials, where he leads the development of next generation technology for producing low cost, low emission hydrogen and carbon black, an important raw material that's used in the manufacture of rubber and plastic. And prior to Monolith, HANSON served as the global director of product management for Areva Solar, the solar division of the world's largest nuclear company. He has a master's degree in mechanical engineering from Stanford. And Monolith is headquartered right here in Lincoln and is a global manufacturing changemaker, pioneering a one-of-a-kind technology to significantly reduce carbon emissions. Thank you so much for having a mission-oriented work that you brought here to Lincoln. Rob, we are so excited that you chose Nebraska and really looking forward to learning more about your company. So why don't you just tell us a little bit more about Monolith?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. Really, really excited to have this conversation today. So Monolith's a technology company, and we do advanced manufacturing. we invented this process called methane pyrolysis. And what it is we take methane, which is the main ingredient in natural gas. It's also the main ingredient in renewable natural gas, so which could come from a biological source. And we split it into its two chemical components, which are hydrogen and solid carbon. And our process is really special because if you do that, you get two things. One, you create cost-effective products like hydrogen and like carbon black, but also you don't create any CO2 in the manufacturing of those two products. And that's a really big deal because the manufacturing sector accounts for about a quarter of all CO2 emissions globally. And so we're a company that's focused on some of the harder to decarbonize sectors. You know, often in climate change, you talk about the electricity sector or the transportation sector, both really, really important sectors to decarbonize, but that's only about half the problem when it comes to global greenhouse gas emissions. And we're targeting some of those harder to hit sectors of the economy that also need to be decarbonized.
Well, that's fantastic. There's so much innovation that we need in order to build a more climate smart future. And it sounds like you're on the front lines of that work. Could you tell us more about the role of innovation and technology and how they can help create the environmental transformation that companies like Monolith are seeking?
Yeah, I think, at least when I think about climate change and what we're going to have to do as, you know, a city and a state and a country and a world, there's two parts. There's, of course, policy and how we think about the externalities and the things that we produce. But then there's also technology. And so I think sometimes people get caught where they think it's just strictly policy. And if we just wanted to be a clean energy economy, we just need to say, make it so. But half of the challenge is technology. And we don't have the technology yet in many areas that we need to both kind of produce the energy and products that drive our economy, but also not have a greenhouse gas footprint associated with it. So that's where innovation comes in. And it's like the most thrilling work. I just feel so fortunate to get to do it, where you know you're working on something important and you also know you're innovating and creating new things. And so I'm obviously an engineer, but I think it's something that cuts beyond just engineering, is that like fulfillment of doing work that you know has material impact and is super fun. So yeah, so innovation, I mean, I think we're in this huge energy transition, and I think innovation is going to be right at the center of it with policy.
Agreed. I think a lot of people might think about climate activism going back in our history as a country, but right now what we're seeing is so much environmental entrepreneurship, and it's really exciting to see what you're doing. And we're so glad you're here. You started in Silicon Valley. How did you make the decision to ultimately end up here in Nebraska?
Yeah. So for 8 years, we were in the San Francisco Bay Area, and great, tons of talent, tons of entrepreneurial spirit. We built our demonstration facility there. But then when we were looking to scale up, we knew we weren't going to do it in California. And so we did a big search. We looked at probably close to 20 different states, and we ended up here. And what we love about Nebraska, and I'm now a Nebraska resident, I'm a Lincoln resident. My family moved along with me, and my kids go to LPS schools, and we fully kind of embraced the lifestyle here. But what brought us here was number one, great electric infrastructure with one of the best renewable resources in the country. A lot of people don't think about Nebraska as like this awesome renewable state, but it is. Some of the best wind and also pretty good solar, and a lot of kind of space and land and a good, strong electric grid. So that was one, because the primary input to our process is electricity. And so the massive renewable resource was really exciting. I'd say number two was just general infrastructure and a friendly business climate. And so, you know, good established law, kind of reasonable tax situation, and, you know, good roads, rail, all those kind of nuts and bolts things. And then finally, we were really welcomed here. So that wasn't true in every state. But I think, you know, Nebraskans can kind of appreciate that dual intent of economic development, but also innovation and environmental transformation. And so that was really cool, that it wasn't a trade-off. It wasn't that you have to pick one or the other. So you could really do both. Like you could create new jobs and new industries, but you could also have a view towards wanting to have environmental transformation. And so it was like all those things together that brought us here in the end. And so we moved the headquarters. We've moved about 50 families here, and then we've hired another 50 kind of local Nebraskans or people from outside that have moved here to take jobs.
That's fantastic. We're so glad that you felt the sunshine, literally and figuratively, here in Lincoln and in Nebraska. And we're so glad that you helped us with our brain gain and to help grow jobs. And you can't do that without good products. Can you tell us more about what you make, what carbon black truly is, and how it impacts our everyday lives, what that actually means, and maybe what you're doing as a company to make that manufacturing of carbon black more sustainable?
Yeah, so I'll talk about carbon black first and then hydrogen. So carbon black is a material that everyone kind of uses and touches every day, but most people have never heard of it. And so it's just a solid carbon powder, and its primary use is in car tires. So a third of every tire on the planet is carbon black. So a tire is kind of 2/3 rubber, 1/3 carbon black. And it goes in there to make the rubber stronger and reinforce it. Been around for a very long time. And so demand for carbon black is essentially every time a tire somewhere in the world turns over, a little bit of carbon black is lost and needs to be replaced. The conventional way of making carbon black involves burning a heavy cut of oil and has 2.3 tons of CO2 emitted with every ton of carbon black produced. The way we make it in this methane pyrolysis process I mentioned creates 0 tons of CO2 for every ton of carbon black. So it's a case where we can make this really essential product that kind of, you can't think of something more fundamental than the wheel, and but do it in a clean way. And so super excited to kind of get to hit one of those really foundational essential products.
Wonderful. Well, you mentioned also that you're producing clean hydrogen. Do you want to tell us more about how you're doing that?
Yeah, super exciting. So I think when you think of broadly the energy transition and climate change, and I started my career here. So in 2008, I started working in solar and started renewables and did a little bit of stuff in batteries and now into hydrogen. But initially, the thought for climate transition and energy transition was it was going to be two things. It was going to be renewables, wind and solar, and it was going to be batteries for short duration storage and for electrification of transportation. And that was the narrative, and that was the way people were thinking for a long time. And then something pretty big happened about 2 years ago. And this started in Europe, where people started making commitments that they were going to get to 80 or 100% decarbonization by 2040 or 2050. Commitments were made, and then they said, okay, go figure out how we're going to do this. And everyone went and they started saying, okay, wind, solar, batteries. They did the math, and they said, that only gets us 50%. It doesn't get us 80%. It doesn't get us 100%, because there's all these sectors of the economy that you can't electrify. Now, like wind and solar are going to be essential, as are batteries, but you need something else. And what's emerged is hydrogen is the third leg of the stool for making the energy transition. And it's because hydrogen can hit lots of those areas that batteries and wind and solar can't. So an example would be aviation fuel. Airplanes are not going to go to batteries. There's not the energy density. But you can make airplanes work with hydrogen. You can also make synthetic jet fuel from hydrogen that won't have CO2 impact on a full life cycle. Steel production is another one. Steel production accounts for 6% of global CO2, and it's something that you can electrify. But hydrogen works really well to reduce iron ore into steel. And so when you do the math, there's another like 30 to 40% of the economy where hydrogen is the key. Now, the challenge is, how do you make hydrogen without making CO2? And that's where our process is perfect. And so we're really excited about the plant we're building here for the carbon black, but we also think it's going to be a major hydrogen hub and kind of serve as a great example of producing clean hydrogen to act as that third leg of the energy transition stool beside wind and solar and batteries.
Well, with all the challenges we face, we're so glad that you're here thinking big. And I wonder what you think other Nebraska companies might learn from your experience at Monolith around achieving both, climate goals, but also achieving economic prosperity and growing good jobs here in Nebraska at the same time that we're being good stewards of the environment.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. I think it starts and ends with people. So, that's kind of always my advice. If anyone ever wants it, as it relates to business, is like try to hire the most talented, hardest working people. We've had tons of success with that in Nebraska, but that's kind of where it always starts and ends. And then I think the second one is, I think it becomes more and more important with this next generation coming into the workforce, is you've got to have your vision aligned with where kind of their morals sit. And I think a lot of people want to work for companies that are working on the big challenges, whether that's in healthcare or whether that's in, this case, the energy transition and climate. And so I think just being really bold with that and really going after those big global challenges that we're all facing and trying to attract great people to help make it a reality.
I like what you said about it starts with people and it ends with people, because that's how I think about climate action. Climate action isn't just about hitting these amazing targets, visionary targets, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's about what that means for people and their quality of life, and making sure that the earth our children and grandchildren inherit is at least as good as how we found it. So I'm gonna make note of that saying that you just shared. With that, I just wonder what's next for Monolith. You've got a lot on your plate. What else is on the horizon?
Yeah, so we built the first phase of project south of Lincoln. It's called the Olive Creek Project, and the first phase is now up and running, and it's the largest clean carbon black manufacturing plant in the world. And it's also the largest CO2-free hydrogen producing plant in the country. And so we're super proud of that. It was over $100 million of investment into the state, brand new technology, and it works. Next is we're planning to expand that plant quite dramatically, by a factor of 10. And so that'll make it, just a really dramatic kind of first of its kind, large scale clean hydrogen and carbon black plant. And that's next, and we're really focused on that. Beyond that, I think our technology could be applied many other places in the country and the world, and there's just tremendous interest in doing it. But it all starts here, and it starts with really demonstrating the commercial viability of this technology. And so we're super excited to just continue to get to work on that with great people and great support from the community.
Well, we're really excited too. So pleased to know that you're helping to grow our city by bringing your family here, by creating new jobs, by advancing innovation and technology to help create sustainable solutions for some of our biggest challenges, and demonstrating in real time just what that means for growing prosperity. It's really tremendous what you're doing, and so great to speak with you today. Thanks for sharing about Monolith, and thank you again for choosing Lincoln and Nebraska.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and thanks for all your leadership in this area. Really appreciate it. It matters.
Thank you. Our third guest today has leveraged wireless technology to close the digital divide in rural Nebraska in order to conserve water, as well as open up the carbon market to agricultural producers. Joining me now is Julie BUSHELL, the president of Paige Wireless and director of Paige Precision Agriculture. A transformational leader, Julie is passionate about empowering and shaping the sustainable industries of the future through technological advancements in IoT, broadband, biosecurity, food safety, and precision agriculture. Her focus is on agricultural producers and their ability to compete on a global scale, from products and services to emerging technology, advocacy, and sustainable practices. BUSHELL serves on the National Irrigation Association Board of Directors, where she has been the chair and vice chair of the Government Affairs Committee. Julie also serves as vice chair for Encouraging Adoption of Precision Agriculture Working Group for the FCC's Precision Ag Connectivity Task Force. Well, Julie, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to meet with you and to learn more about Paige Wireless and Paige Precision Ag. But first, I know you recently moved to Lincoln, so welcome to the capital city. Tell us, how are you enjoying it so far?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. We love it. It truly has been a welcoming experience, arms wide open, really big town with the small town feel. So it's been truly perfect.
I'm so glad to hear that. I agree. This is something really special about Lincoln, and we're glad you're adding to that with all that you're doing. I understand that Paige Wireless deployed the first LoRaWAN wireless network across the state. Can you tell us more about what that means for rural communities and for the closing of the digital divide?
Absolutely. So we are certainly proud that Nebraska is the first statewide network, or LoRaWAN network in North America. We started in Nebraska to really show the innovation that happens here in the heartland and educate consumers and really the global world of what we're doing right here as far as our very proactive approach to water management, the good job our producers are doing. And what that meant for closing the digital divide is we actually deployed in the most rural towns first, broadband over cropland and in areas that actually had no people to really show that starting to close this digital divide is going to have to look at things a little differently. Policy will have to change. And what we really need connected are, tractors and combines and irrigation systems, so we totally can control and understand what's going on in production agriculture.
Absolutely. And we knew that the digital divide was a problem prior to the pandemic. Yes. But of course, now we know just how incredibly important it is to close that for individuals, for students, and of course, in the pursuit of economic prosperity. So building on the foundation of the LoRaWAN wireless network, it sounds like you mentioned you've been involved in water conservation strategies using high-tech sensors and IoT technology. Can you tell us more about that innovation and why it matters?
Absolutely. So Nebraska is looked at globally as the leader in groundwater management. And by deploying this technology, we're actually able to show the world just how we do that. So we have thousands of sensors deployed across Nebraska in monitoring wells. So essentially we are giving water managers real-time data of groundwater behaviors. And this is the first technology of its kind. So for the first time ever, we are seeing the groundwater behavior every 30 minutes throughout the year. Prior to the technology, groundwater managers were doing tests twice a year, so before irrigation season and after. And now we're really seeing what rainfall's doing for our groundwater table and just every input and how it's affecting it. So it's been very exciting. But again, really wanting to show that Nebraska is the leader, and now we have that verifiable data to do that.
That's excellent. We like to lead in Nebraska. Well, you built these digital platforms and connections and data management systems. What does that mean for investing in healthy soils and through a competitive carbon market?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's certainly something that's leading our business now, and that is how can we enable producers to get into the carbon markets with verifiable data? As the markets mature, we know that while today a carbon score and a carbon credit might just require, a receipt of a type of seed that a producer planted, but we do believe that the discerning buyers will certainly ask for third-party verified data to prove that the practices were implemented, and then essentially can show continuous improvement, which to me is really the definition of sustainability. And where we've come into play is we're deploying sensors so that producers can do that. They can show that they were efficiently irrigating. They can show that they have improved their soil health, and then take that data to the carbon market. And we believe that that data will essentially amplify the cost of the carbon credit, so driving that premium back to the producer.
That's fantastic. It sounds like it'll make their jobs easier. They'll know that they're doing business better, and they will be advancing some really important climate goals that, again, help support their industry.
Absolutely.
Well, I hear that we may have a visit from Mother Nature, your 6-year-old daughter, Adela. What does Adela think about your work and about protecting the environment and our people?
She loves it. She is absolutely Mother Nature is what she calls herself, actually. She is just totally obsessed with taking care of the environment, whether that's AV technology or let's see what we're doing for producers. So I think she wants to visit us and maybe have a question for you, if that's okay.
I would love it.
Sure.
Hi, Adela. How are you today?
Good.
It's nice to see you. I hear you have a nickname, Mother Nature. You want to tell us about that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
My dad has been like making a job of Mother Nature.
Yeah. What do you like about protecting Mother Nature? What's your favorite thing to do?
Well, I don't have a favorite thing to do.
You don't?
No.
No? Do you think it's important to protect Mother Nature?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why is that?
Because if you don't protect it, it'll be filled with trash.
Yeah, that's right. Is that a good thing?
No.
No. Can you tell the mayor that?
It's not a good thing. Yeah, Mother Nature could get trashed.
We definitely don't want that. We want to take care of Mother Nature and make sure that we have good air to breathe and clean streams for you to swim in and green grass for you to play on and so that life is good for you, Adela.
Yep.
You tell her thank you for that, right?
Thank you for that.
Well, thank you for working to protect our environment and our life and our community here. And I appreciate that you're taking that job so seriously and at such a young age.
Okay.
And Julie, thank you as well. Thank you so much for everything you're doing in our state and for taking some time to share all that you are doing in your sector to advance economic prosperity here in our state and beyond, at the same time that you're making our quality of life better for the long term. It means the world.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thanks for all of your doing. It's really appreciated, especially by her, to see you as such an awesome leader.
Thank you. You too, take care, all right?
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. My next guest knows very well the impacts of Mother Nature, particularly as we see more frequent and severe weather due to climate change. It's my pleasure to introduce Alex McKIERNAN of Robinette Farms in Martell, Nebraska, who's here to share a little bit more about the carbon reducing benefits of healthy soil and the role of Nebraska farmers to produce resilient local food systems. Alex and his wife, Chloe Deagle, run the business, and their goal is to produce high quality organic greens for busy families trying to get quick, healthy meals on the table each day. Chloe manages the team and marketing and making sure the farm runs smoothly. And Alex is the jack of all trades and project manager for the farm. He handles the financials, HR, sales, as well as managing the pasture and fencing at Robinette. Alex, it's so great to see you. I'm really excited to learn more about Robinette Farms. I've enjoyed your produce and seen your poster up at Open Harvest and at farmers markets. Can you tell us more about your business and how it contributes to a resilient local food system?
Sure. Well, thanks for having us. I really appreciate the invite. Chloe grew up in Lincoln. I grew up in Illinois, and neither one of us grew up on farms. So we didn't grow up with agriculture other than, home gardens and things. After college, Chloe really got interested in local food and wanted to find out more about local food systems and eating locally. So she worked on a farm on the Front Range of Colorado. That was about almost 20 years ago that she did that. And she really got hooked on agriculture, and she's been doing it ever since. And I sort of married into it. Around 2008, we wanted to take my jack of all trades skills and her love of agriculture and kind of see if we could make farming work. So Robinette started in 2010 on rented land on the northeast side of Lincoln. And then we moved to where we are in Martell in late 2010. We've grown pretty much anything you could think of. We've raised all sorts of different animals. And we've really, in the last few years, focused on baby greens, salad greens, spinach, and then what we call microgreens that you can find around Lincoln. And they're just tiny versions of lots of plants that you've eaten before. And they're really nutritious and tasty as well. So they kind of add in flavors to different meals. we have always been passionate about the impact that agriculture and food can have on communities and hopefully on the environment as well. And so we do our best to check all of those boxes: healthy product, tasty product, environmentally safe product, and bringing people into the community. But as you know, it's difficult to check every box and keep people engaged.
Well, we appreciate your effort to do that, and it sounds like you're being very successful. When people talk about a resilient local food system, what does that mean? Like, help the folks watching understand more about why that matters.
Sure. Well, I think that resiliency in a local food system, just this year, in the last year, we've had two big events that have made that very apparent. COVID, of course, very quickly changed the dynamics of the food system. And we, in the short term, really suffered from not having functional local food chains that could step in when regional systems fall apart and national and international shipping systems fall apart. So that was one event. And then recently in Texas, with the crazy weather and the power generation issues, that also was a real reminder just of how difficult providing food and providing basic resources can be. We forget how much is provided for us as far as power and everything else. And then when you throw climate change into the mix, I think hopefully we don't see more COVID-like events with climate change, but we certainly are going to see more extreme weather related events that are really going to stress our system. And so I think what a resilient food system means to me is it is a very dynamic food system. We have to be able to quickly pivot from different food sources and different suppliers and continue to get people the food that they need. And I think that requires a lot of education, and then it requires a lot of real careful thinking about how to develop systems at different scales that can then, you can turn the knob on one and scale one up when the other isn't working. And that's hard to do because it requires infrastructure that's designed for a certain capacity. So I think it's important when we're talking about food resiliency to think about how we can reach people more quickly with information. And I think there's technological solutions that can help us get there. And that's one big aspect.
Definitely. And I think you touched on the awareness that's maybe grown just in the last year because of the pandemic, when we had supply chains interrupted, just realizing for the first time just how much we depend on others to make sure that there's food on our tables. And food security is always an important issue, but I think maybe for the first time we've seen people experience that food insecurity on a scale that is maybe unprecedented in the past year. Mm-hmm. When we think about what it takes to have a thriving local food market, we think about, I think, networks and partnerships that have to be available. Can you speak a little bit to that? Can you describe the network and partnerships that have to be available to make that possible?
Yeah. Well, when we started out, we started with two primary marketing outlets. One would be the farmers markets, and we sold at various farmers markets in Lincoln for about 10 years. Last year was the first summer that we didn't sell at farmers markets. And the second vehicle that we use is our community supported agriculture program. It's kind of like a membership or a subscription. And that allows us to connect directly to consumers and set our own schedule, so it doesn't necessarily follow the farmers market. Those are two really important venues that we have and that we use. And those partnerships are growing now as we change our model a little bit. So when we stopped going to farmers market, which for us has been a great launching point, but it began to limit how we want to do things. And to be quite honest, lifestyle wise, we wanted to be a little more free on our weekends, at least not hooked to a schedule. So we started to focus more on our subscription programs. And in order to do that and make them more attractive, we started to partner with other local farms. And so we've done that on our own directly with other local farmers to sell the things that they do really well. And then we've worked on the wholesale end, which has become increasingly more of our business, with a group in particular called Lone Tree Foods, which is a local foods distributor. And they're owned by a few local farmers that farm mostly in Lancaster County. And they've tried to reach larger scale wholesale buyers like grocery stores, restaurants, institutional buyers like hospitals and schools. And that's been really important for us as well. And so those relationships have been huge for us, and we continue to try to develop them. And in order to make them valuable, I think for customers, we really have to educate customers about where their food is coming from. And again, that starts getting at some of those boxes that are difficult to check all the time, to both be an educator and a producer and a marketer, and do the right thing for the environment. So we are always learning and always trying to improve, but it's doesn't always work.
Well, and I love hearing that you're helping hospitals have healthier food for people who are healing, or students, young bodies that are growing. That means the world. What can the city do? What can the city do to help nurture those networks and partnerships and help grow a local food culture?
Sure. I think that one of the most important ways that the city can help move that forward is to help create events and culture, like you said, culture, to generate positive emotional experiences around food. And I think the city has a role to play in that, to help set the table, so to speak, for events that are centered on food and on farming. Some of the most, I think, positive feedback and long-lasting feedback that we've had at Robinette Farms are for some events that we held in the summer of 2012 and 2013. There were solstice events in June, which is a terrible time for a farmer to plan a party, but that's what we did. And they involved local music and a lot of local food prepared by local food trucks. And we have had people that still to this day come up to us and talk about how meaningful that was to walk around the farm and then eat local food and hear local music and drink local beer and wine. And I think that the city and municipalities in general can do a really good job of helping create more of those events and build education and fun into them together. I think that's one area. You know, from a regulatory standpoint, I think that cities and counties can think about if there are ways they can creatively leverage technology to help people connect to local farmers and local producers. And I don't know exactly what levers you have to pull in that regard, but I think that could be helpful as well.
Well, technology to connect people and events and positive emotional experiences around food all sound fantastic to me. So I'm excited to get to work with your suggestions.
Yeah.
How does sustainable agriculture and managing carbon help you with your operations at Robinette?
You know, if you have a carbon sort of mindset and you think about managing and trying to sequester carbon with however you farm at whatever scale, in my experience, it really gets at all the other things that you want to do as a farmer or a land manager. So one of the biggest changes we're going to see with climate change is more variability in rainfall events, for example. And so heavier rains or longer periods of time without rain. And if you have really high levels of organic matter and carbon in your soil by managing it through a variety of ways, you can decrease runoff when you get those big rainfall events, and you can store water a lot longer. You basically create like a sponge in your soil. The more carbon, the more organic matter, the more like a sponge it is. So it'll soak up that water when it comes quick, and you'll have less runoff, which will help with flooding and all sorts of other things. And then when there's longer periods between rains, like it looks like it might be this year, that carbon-rich soil will hold on to moisture longer. And so then you can start looking at things like nutrient management, which is a big deal. The dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is primarily, unfortunately, from farmers having nutrient runoff. And that's not a criticism necessarily of farmers. It's a difficult task to complete. But if you are managing for carbon, you can hang on to more of that soil and to more of that fertility, those nutrients that cause problems downstream. And then those rich soils, carbon-rich soils, also are create a more healthy environment and biologically active environment for the crops that you're trying to grow. So, and hopefully someday, I mean, I think to really deal with carbon emissions and climate change, there will need to be a carbon market at some point. I don't imagine that's a lever you can pull, but with carbon markets, then there becomes an amazing, huge opportunity for farmers and ranchers all across the country, and certainly in Nebraska, to benefit from doing the right thing for their soil, which then helps mitigate runoff and helps mitigate nutrient pollution. So, it gets a fancy sustainability buzzword, and sometimes people like to apply environmentalist labels to us or the things we're doing. But I think there's a lot of really reasonable, thoughtful, and hopefully profitable reasons to do it as well.
Yeah, I like the way you talked about being a farmer and a land manager, and you are running a business. How do you grow your business while being a good land manager, a good steward of the land?
That is, I think that is the most challenging thing for sure. Many of the things that we're trying to do with carbon management, better grazing, less tillage, all these sorts of things aren't necessarily rewarded by the market. Those are externalized costs that we're trying to absorb. And so I think the jury's still out if we can do it in the long run, sustainably from a financial standpoint. But we really have to be, as direct marketers, we really have to tell people that story. And hopefully when people have a choice between maybe this one's a little more high priced because they're doing a lot more things that I support, they're willing to make that choice. But if we had this conversation right now with a corn or bean producer, they're really, as a commodity grower, in a difficult spot because they have to be the low cost producer. That's commodity economics. And so those folks can't put, their fancy Robinette logo on something and say, oh, those folks are, I want to support that farmer. And I think it's much harder for someone who doesn't have a brand or a direct market identity to do those sorts of things. And so that may be another area where government can help those farmers find ways to do the right thing when the market at this point is not rewarding them for it. Although I hope it will. I mean, I think the ecosystem services market that goes beyond just carbon is developing, and hopefully someday will be ways that those farmers can contribute.
Well, it's really important to support local farms, and we're lucky in Lincoln to be close to so many. And recently we've launched a buy local campaign here in Lincoln, and that's for our businesses, but that can also be for our local farms and the food that we consume. So we'll continue to beat that drum because we know how important it is to keep our money in our communities, and that the multiplier effect in our local economy of dollars that are circulating helps keep people employed. It helps grow jobs, and it's good for the strength and resilience of our community. So I hear what you're saying.
Good.
What's on the horizon for Robinette Farms?
Well, Robinette, I think, is changing and growing. As I said, we're really trying to increase the amount of other farmers that we work with so that our customers can buy our greens, but also local cheese and milk and bread and locally roasted coffee and other vegetables and all the sorts of things that people like to find around here. We're trying to make it more available from local producers through Robinette. We also, a year ago, right before the pandemic really hit, we committed to another piece of land that's in Pawnee County. And that's where I am now, where we were doing some prescribed burning of grasslands. And that business is really more focused on the ecosystem services end of things. So we're not direct marketers down here. We're trying to do a lot of thoughtful, more progressively minded grazing, again, to sequester more carbon in the ground. So if we manage that grassland well, we can store carbon and help maybe start trying to do our part with climate change. And I think that Robinette hopefully can dovetail with that and find ways that those two businesses can work together.
Well, thank you for that. Thanks so much for investing in sustainable agriculture and leading in our community and setting such a great example. You're also making me really hungry with what you're talking about all your food. It's great to see you, and really all the best to you and your family. You take care.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
I want to thank all of my guests today for sharing more about the economic advantages of environmental stewardship, as well as for taking steps to build climate-smart solutions. It's becoming clearer every day that historic and transformational change is afoot. Now is the time for a bold and achievable vision that will chart the course for our collective success. By working together, we can harness our energy for innovation and problem solving. We can grow jobs as well as our economy while protecting our environment and our neighbors. And in doing so, we all share in the benefits of a safe, secure, and more successful and resilient future. Thank you.